over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Posted yesterday a preview of that Greenbrier event from James Mazzola. James hit 3 straight outright winners in the FedEx Cup playoffs to round out last year. So he's looking forward to getting off to the new 2019-20 PGA Tour season on a high note with his preview over at the website. My college football power ratings posted over there. Some situational betting tips for college football as well. WNBA playoffs begin tonight. Admir Algic with a good preview for us on those, as well as game previews for each of tonight's playoff matchups. I just wrote up a NASCAR preview for the South Point 400 out in Las Vegas. The NASCAR playoffs start this weekend. We'll have some NHL coverage coming up here soon. NBA coverage will come your way shortly as well. Those 2 seasons not that far away. College basketball less than 8 weeks away now. Very busy time over at BangTheBook.com. Lots of good stuff for you to check out over there. Also on our Bang the Book YouTube channel, posted 8 videos yesterday. 7 football free picks, 4 from myself, 3 from Brian Blessing, who you heard on yesterday's show, and also Brian's preview of that event at the Greenbrier. So good stuff going on over on our Bang the Book YouTube page as well. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. We fire things up here on the program today with our first guest, professional handicapper Bryan Leonard from WagerTalk.com. Bryan, how's it going today, man?
Everything's going good. Looking forward to another week of football and more betting opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And you're also still keeping up with baseball as well. I know you hit a big 5% play a couple of days ago on the Yankees, and kudos to you for that. I mean, I've mentioned this before on the show. I just gave up on baseball for this season. It was a bad year for me, wanting to focus on football, but you're still chugging along strong over there on the diamond.
Yeah, it's working out really well, and in fact, I passed yesterday. The closest play I had was Cleveland, and Cleveland wins in a rout. So even when you, while people will complain that I should have given that out as a winner, I'm just glad that the game I would have given out is a winner. That means I'm still on a nice little run, and I'm very confident going into today's action. I've already got a couple games circled. I haven't put my plays up for today, but looks like a solid card in Major League Baseball.
Now, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with baseball or anything like that, but I'm just kind of curious here. You know, a lot more people now back in the fray with football. They're looking for things to bet during the week. Have you noticed any changes to the lines that are out there for baseball based on, any additional public action or anything like that?
No, actually, just the opposite. I think the sharps, for the most part, are giving up on baseball, similar to what you did. And the lines aren't moving like they did in the past. And, the public is either a baseball fan or you're not. And once football starts, you usually see a drop-off in baseball for some reason. But in my regards, the more things the odds maker needs to put lines on, the easier it is to bet. You talked about basketball and the hockey starting in the next month or so. That's a lot of work for the sports books to have solid numbers on every single game and every single sport. And that's the time to take advantage of. I know a lot of guys that will bet NBA and college basketball till the beginning of January and quit because that's when they make the most profit. So just keep in mind, as the season goes on for most of these sports, it gets harder to win on. The advantage you have in baseball is that football is your major sport in the United States. And so when it does get to the end of baseball, those people tend to fade out. So the people that actually bet baseball for a living get some good numbers. They don't have to fight as much with the guys out there that are placing the bigger bets in football as they would be when football's not around.
Well, and hopefully you can keep it up here and keep it going through the playoffs in Major League Baseball as well. But to get back to football here, since that's what a lot of us are interested in and what a lot of us are talking about here at this time of the year, of course, I've had this conversation with my previous guests throughout the week, and I'll continue to have it as we go through the rest of the week here on the show. Week 2 to week 3 is now overreaction week in college football. Used to be week 1 to week 2. Now it's been drilled into us. Don't overreact to one game. Of course, we'll talk about that being the thing in the NFL here this week. But in college football, everyone does give these teams a game usually. Then after week 2, everyone starts to make, the judgments and assessments that they'll keep with them for the next several weeks here. So did you make a lot of big adjustments coming out of week 2?
I did add to my adjustments, most of them that I made in week 1. I'm very conservative when it comes down to it. If I'm going to move somebody, I'll move them 3 points. Basically, I continued on with bringing Maryland up and bringing North Carolina up, dropping Florida State for the most part. One of the games that we were looking at last week, and I think just about everybody talked about, was the South Florida Georgia Tech game, where we couldn't believe that Georgia Tech was a 6-point favorite and actually took money. It went up 6.5. That one was pretty evenly played, so I didn't have to make any adjustments on that off of what I originally did, which wasn't a whole lot, at least on the Georgia Tech side. I did drop South Florida a little bit the first week, but for the most part, it's the teams that have been surprising. We talk about other people who do the lines and do their power ratings. Bill Connolly is one of those guys, and he says, I highly respect Bill Connolly's work, and he says that his system is still not giving full credit to North Carolina and Maryland. I'm pretty much the same way. I have moved it enough where I think I'm in the right ballpark, but still it's not showing that I should be backing those teams at this point, which is kind of where I want to be. It's very rare you find a team that you've done all of your work ahead of time coming into the season, and all of a sudden they are so much better than what anybody projected. People can have good days, bad days, good streaks, bad streaks. To make that a judgment on, especially Maryland to me, because I didn't really like the coaching hire. He's a great recruiter, but he's never proven himself to be a coach, even though he's got good coordinators. I'm going to hold back a little bit on it. I don't want to all of a sudden change my mind after 2 games. And sure, I was wrong. They're not nearly going to be as bad as I thought they were, but I don't know if they're going to be as good as what a lot of people are saying right now.
That's such an interesting game. And, I've got that game, Maryland minus 5.5. I have moved them up quite a bit since the beginning of the year, but, I'm not sure I necessarily want to believe it. And we had this discussion on yesterday's show with Rolf Michaels, who you work with over at wagertalk.com. And, I was kind of looking at that Maryland blowout over Syracuse as saying, well, maybe Syracuse is just really terrible. Obviously offensively they drop off without Eric Dungy. The defense played well against Liberty in week 1, but Liberty's not a very good team, and we saw that in week 2. So I didn't give Maryland the same amount of respect here going from week 2 to week 3 that I did from week 1 to week 2. And I am happy to see that number moving down. It got as high as 8.5 out there, now down to 7. Like I said, my number is 5.5, close to where it opened. So maybe I'm off on that game, but at least the line is moving in my direction. And there are several games this week I'm off multiple points on. At least they're moving my way. Obviously, I have to adjust something going into week 4, but at least the numbers are moving towards mine. And, my power ratings aren't as efficient as I'd want them to be, but it is a silver lining when the numbers are moving in your direction.
It definitely is. And you talk about the Syracuse-Maryland game last week. I was on Syracuse. It was a terrible loss. But there was a lot of other sharp guys that were on Syracuse. And if you followed the lines all week long, there was a give and take from 2 rival syndicates betting the opposite sides, and obviously the syndicate that agreed with me had the wrong side. But it's early in the season. You mentioned in a prior conversation we had about when you have something like that where a team looks good and a team looks bad, who do you credit that to, or who do you say who was the dominant part? So it takes 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks actually, to decide, say, you know what, maybe it was that the Liberty wasn't bad or Syracuse wasn't bad or was bad or whatever. And it's a judgment call. That's one of the things for myself when I do adjust my power ratings, that it's harder for me to tell who was good and who was bad. I just knew that there needs to be an adjustment somewhere. I just don't know how many points to give the one and take off from the other. And I'm always trying to learn from other people, and I follow other people's movements, and they're very similar to mine. So I think that's a guessing game by a lot of people early on. At the end of the year, you don't have nearly as many line movements as you do earlier in the season.
Well, and I haven't made any plays yet in college football this week. I was out tailgating for the Browns game, didn't have my power ratings ready, wasn't able to grab openers like I typically do. Haven't played anything yet here so far this week. So I'm kind of waiting for the market to settle in. And yeah, I may lose some line value based on some of those games where my power ratings are off. But also, if I'm off that badly at this time of the year with a couple of data points already, I probably should wait and just see, which direction these numbers wind up going. And, again, Maryland and Temple being one of them, where Temple looks like a sharp side here this week, unless this is a setup to drag that number down a little bit, come back over the top on Maryland later on in the week. That could be the case. So, again, a lot of chess being played out there in the markets here early on in the week, and maybe a little bit of chess being played with this first game that I want to talk about here. Game 121-122, Eastern Michigan on the road at Illinois. Eastern Michigan last week in a pretty good spot. They take on a Kentucky team laying a big number at home. Kentucky covering for the first time in 10 games as a double-digit home favorite in week 1. They go to week 2, cover that number as well, despite what a lot of people believe to be a look-ahead spot with Florida on deck. Illinois, 3-touchdown favorite, going to UConn, took some money in that game even, never came close to covering the number. Illinois is an 8-point favorite here this week, Brian. But what do you make of this number and of these two teams?
Yeah, I'm looking to play Illinois. I'm hoping to catch a 7. My number is probably about a 9 here. The reason I want to play Illinois is more of a play against Eastern Michigan. This will be their 3rd straight road game. They play Central Connecticut State the following week at home. But after that, they play Central Michigan, a conference game. And so 4 of their first 5 games are going to be on the road. You mentioned the Kentucky game last week. They only lose yardage by 75 yards, but they do lose the game by 21 points. Kentucky's a team that I'm looking to fade as the year goes on here. I believe they're 1-1 against the spread so far. But they lost a lot of good players last year, and I don't think they recruit well enough to replace them at this point. Illinois beat the hell out of Akron in week 1. Akron, unfortunately, my alma mater, is one of the worst teams in college football, 42-3. But the Connecticut thing, I think, a lot of this I try to put myself in the position of being a player and what you're thinking. So all of a sudden, Illinois starts the season, and, I've heard some talk that Illinois may be a little bit better this year. They go out and they crush Akron, and then they're playing what a lot of people thought would be by far the worst team in college football in Connecticut the next week. So you're coming off a rare blowout win for Illinois, which they don't see very often. Now you're going to play a team that you've been reading, and it's hard to get up for a team like Connecticut when all you've been reading is, they're leaving the conference and nobody wants them, and that, they can't get any fans. They're just a terrible football team. And they come out and they win that game 31-23, out-yarding them by 72. That may have been one of those games where they just took it for granted. Now that they were in an actual game against one of the worst teams in college football, it may be a wake-up call here for them at home against Eastern Michigan. And they do have Nebraska on deck. It's either a look ahead for Nebraska or it's a situation where they could try to get back to their winning ways and dominating ways here against Eastern Michigan. And I think that's the way it's going to go. If I see 7, I'm jumping on Illinois. Don't know if we'll get there, but it's on my list.
Well, and one other thing, we found out that Randy Ensel's mom had passed away last weekend. So, maybe UConn kind of rallying a little bit for their head coach as well in that spot. Mm-hmm. And, I don't think we knew that before the game. So, there are some of those emotional appeals as well. Like, for example, on Saturday, I was in the midst of an awful, shitty Saturday. And then I see on Twitter that Blake Anderson, Arkansas State's head coach, surprised the team out in Las Vegas before their game. He had been away from the team after the death of his wife. Now he shows up there in Las Vegas, played Arkansas State as a pick-em immediately, had them a 2-point favorite in the game anyway, just hadn't gotten around to playing it. Of course, they blow out UNLV in that game. So, again, keep an eye out for some of those emotional appeals here at this time of the year as well. Brian, let's move down to game 129-130 here. Florida Atlantic laying a road number against Ball State. This was 3. It's down to 2 or 2.5 out there in the marketplace. This one's really interesting because FAU has played 2 very good teams, Ohio State and Central Florida. They've looked awful in the process. Here they are laying a road number in Muncie, Indiana. not a place you would typically expect to go. The line is moving down here. Do you agree with that move?
My line is roughly about Florida Atlantic 2, so it's similar to what I have here. Florida Atlantic team that they played Ohio State, and actually, even though they were blown out in that game, 45-21, I was somewhat impressed by their quarterback, Chris Robinson. I thought he played very well. He was pretty accurate against Ohio State, and keep in mind, in the second half of that game, Ohio State called off the dogs basically, so he wasn't going up against Ohio State's full defense and game planning at that point. But I thought he looked pretty good, although his yards per attempt this year is only 4.8. When you play Central Florida and Ohio State, it's not going to be that impressive. But when he gets a chance to play against Ball State here, I think that offensively they're going to do a little bit better. They did have 17 first downs against Ohio State, 22 against Central Florida. So I think from an offensive standpoint, Florida Atlantic will have more success here against a Ball State team who, they against Indiana, they actually lose to Indiana by 10. They only were outgained by 76. Did have a turnover advantage of 1 in there, but I don't know what we could gain last week against Fordham. They put up 596 yards against Fordham, but, the 398 they put up against Atlanta was pretty good. This may look to me, I haven't made any selections other than the 3 I gave my clients based on the opening lines. This could be a game that we could see more offense in this one than we have in the past. Obviously, when you play a team like Florida Atlantic against Ohio State and Central Florida, you expect that offense to really jump up when you play a lesser team. And, Ball State's moved the ball pretty well offensively, so this might be a look at it over as I get later on in the week here.
What's interesting here is I think Ball State was a little bit of a sharp-ish team coming into the season. I think some people did like their season win total over, kind of liked them to improve a little bit here. We're I think 4 years since the hiring of Mike New. So this is kind of a make-or-break year for him as well. So I think that's kind of factoring into this line move a little bit, that people did like Ball State coming into the season. And like I mentioned, this is a very weird spot for a team from Boca Raton to go up to, basically middle of nowhere Indiana and play. So it should be a pretty interesting matchup there. One more game I want to tackle on the college football side with you here, Brian. Game 145-146, another really interesting spot. Georgia Southern on the road at Minnesota. Minnesota 15.5 or 16-point favorite here, coming off of that overtime game last week against Fresno State, and they've got to prep for the option. So this is not a game that a lot of shows are going to talk about, not a game that'll get a lot of run because of the more than 2 touchdown spread. But, man, this is one that jumped off the page to me immediately.
Actually, this is one of the 3 that I used for my clients. I saw Minnesota at 15. I thought the line was going to go up. They did have that overtime game that they ended up winning and pushing the spread, winning by 3 there in that game. Now they're traveling all the way back. It is a situation where obviously Minnesota is not used to playing this type of team. But I like this Minnesota team. And this is a team that I've been looking to back all season long. They had 16 returning starters coming back. South Dakota State didn't do much offensively in that game, and they kind of struggled a little bit. They were actually outgained by 59 yards against South Dakota State. Minnesota, in fact, all the teams in the Big Ten, I tend to play against when they go west. That's a really tough road trip. We've seen this happen in the past from Wisconsin going to Arizona and some of these other teams going out west. So I wasn't expecting much out of Minnesota last week. And for them to actually fight all the way and get that victory in overtime at 38-35, that showed me something for Minnesota, because I wasn't thinking that they were going to do much. And they lost a turnover battle in that game and still won. Now they got Purdue on deck coming next week against this Georgia Southern team. It is somewhat of a sandwich situation here, but I think the line's a little bit short. Georgia Southern plays that first game against LSU, gets demolished by 374 yards. They beat Maine last week by 8 at home, gaining them by 99, plus turnover in that one. So I don't know what we've seen out of Georgia Southern yet. Yes, it's a situation where Minnesota's not used to this type of game, but what I like out of the Big Ten teams is they've got good offensive and defensive lines compared to what you get out of the Conference USAs and the Sun Belt type of teams. So, Michigan struggled last week with Army. I think we all knew that was going to happen a little bit. I didn't think it was going to happen to that effect. But when you play a style of football that you don't normally play, especially a team, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if these guys from Minnesota had never heard of Georgia Southern. So I like the spot for Georgia Southern, but the number I think is more than taking care of that. Like I said, I released it at 15, and it's gone up a little bit since then.
One thing I will say here, Minnesota plays Purdue in 2 weeks, so they do have that conference opener coming up, but they do have a bye next week, so that's a very important thing from a spot standpoint here. I have this game 16.5, so I'm basically right around where the number is right now. I may look up Georgia Southern for the simple fact that when you play against an option team and you have to cover a big favorite role, you better be efficient on offense. And that's been a problem for Minnesota. Their quarterback play has been a struggle in the P.J. Fleck era. You've got to be efficient. If they run the football very well, they can cover this number. But if they have any sorts of turnovers, if Tanner Morgan doesn't play particularly well, I think it's tough to get margin here in some of these option games. So maybe you and I, a little bit of a difference of opinion, maybe a beer bet for us next time I'm out there in town. But speaking real quickly of option teams before we transition to the NFL, Army plays UTSA this week. UTSA, as an FBS member, has never played against the triple option. So Army, a lot of people are going to say they're in a bad spot off that near miss against Michigan, but they're taking on a team that's never seen the option before. So maybe that's something that does benefit the Black Knights a little bit in that game. In any event, Brian, let's transition over to the NFL side here. And like I said, week 2 to week 3 is the overreaction week in college football. It's still week 1 to week 2 in the NFL.
It definitely is, and I still think week 2 in college football is an overreaction. Also, you could just tell by some of those moves that they had last week that I think it's a combination of 2 and 3, both of them. And then at this point, people seem to think that this is the team we have, which is similar to what I was talking about with the Maryland, North Carolina. I'm not a full believer yet, but a lot of people tend to overreact in that regard. But yeah. Last week, and it's interesting, especially in the NFL, because in college you have no preseason, and in the NFL these teams have played the preseason games. These lines have been up for months at this point, and you do all that work before the season, and then you get to the first week of the NFL, and all of a sudden your team that you expected to do well doesn't do well, or in some cases your starting quarterback gets knocked out for 8 weeks. It's a whole different ballgame. It changes so quickly in the NFL based on key players and key observations of what you think a team is going to do as opposed to what they do. We did see some of the things that we, from a coaching standpoint, that we expected. Houston's badly coached, Pittsburgh's badly coached, and they continue to find ways to lose these games against quality opposition. But yeah, it's what you really want to do this week when everybody else is zigging, you want to zag. And that's really in this week in the NFL how you make your money.
Well, and this is why I talk about in college football, putting together my numbers on Friday based on my current power ratings for the next week's games. In the NFL, we don't have to worry about doing that because look-ahead lines are posted. The Westgate puts those up. We know what these numbers are supposed to be the following week, and we've seen some moves off those look-ahead lines of 4, 3.5, 4 points, those types of things. So you can see the overreaction very easily in the NFL based on those adjusted numbers that come out. Yeah, it may be injuries, but a lot of times it's just, what we saw affecting the line the next week.
Yeah, it definitely is. And having your own power ratings definitely helps when it comes to that. You've got some games with some outrageous lines. I mean, the Baltimore situation, I like Baltimore. I think Baltimore and Philadelphia go to the Super Bowl this year, and I said that before the season started. But keep in mind, they could have played last week the worst team that we will see in the NFL. Not only is Miami a team that doesn't have any talent, they've completely decided to throw out this season and play for next year, and they've actually done that with some of their trades. So some of the players on Miami's team right now are looking to be traded because they didn't think the management wanted to win. Obviously we're not there. We don't know what the preparation is there, but yeah, keep that in mind that, Baltimore looked great last week, but it was against a team that could go down as a record bad football team in the NFL.
So a couple of games here that kind of fall into that mold, not with awful teams like Miami, but San Francisco and Cincinnati, game 277, 278, the first one I want to touch on with you here, Brian. I mentioned this on yesterday's show, and in full disclosure to those that missed yesterday's show, I like Cincinnati this week, but apparently everybody else does too, because this line opened San Francisco a favorite. Now Cincinnati, the clear favorite, as high as a 2-point favorite out there. The 49ers won, but didn't look very good. The Bengals lost, but looked really good. Maybe a little bit of overreaction here, but, do you want to step in front of Cincinnati this week?
I like Cincinnati also. I just didn't like the line. It moved really quick, and I didn't get a chance to get on it at that point. But Cincinnati really looked good last week. Now, a lot of it may have been similar to what I talked about in college football, where you get a team like Seattle comes into the season, and for some reason, a lot of people like Seattle. I think they have a lot of talent. I just don't think they're by rushing to football. I just can't see how that's going to be a winning situation where they're running for 4 yards a carry, their team's passing for 6 yards a carry or 6 yards a play. I don't think that's the way to run a football team in this day and age. But Cincinnati was one of those teams that, hey, new coaching staff. These guys never coached in the NBA or in the NFL before. Nobody was playing them up. Their best player was going to be out, the wide receiver, A.J. Green. And so maybe they took it for granted, and Cincinnati played well. But Cincinnati did. They outplayed Seattle in that game. So a lot of people are looking at that. And, I talked about this coming into the season. I said, sure, you have Zach Taylor coming in his first year as head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, not known in the NFL. But still, it's got to be a step up off of what the coaching staff was for the Cincinnati Bengals in the past. Last week at Seattle, they actually outgained the Seahawks by 196 yards. They did lose a turnover battle by 2, and that's why they ended up losing that game. You rarely win with a turnover disadvantage of 2 or more, especially. But this is a pretty good football team at Cincinnati. At least they looked pretty good last week. I preferred Tampa Bay last week. I preferred the over, which should have gotten there, obviously. That's one of the worst bad beats you've seen all season long, with so many turnovers in the opposite red zone of both those teams last week. That game should have flew over, but it didn't, and that's the way it goes sometimes in the NFL. But by not going over gives us a little bit of value when we play Tampa and play San Francisco in the future. So, but I agree. I like the Cincinnati side here. I just don't like the line. It's on my short list. I have not played a single play in the NFL so far this week, but that's one of the games I'm looking forward to.
Well, and that's the thing. Cincinnati's always had talent, and maybe there are questions about Andy Dalton. Maybe he's not the guy. I don't know. Zach Taylor seems to like him. He let him throw the ball 50 times last week, but there's always been talent here. Marvin Lewis just didn't maximize it, and also Marvin Lewis lost. He lost Hugh Jackson. He lost Paul Gunther. He lost Mike Zimmer. He was losing coordinators left and right too. So that was a bit of a problem for Cincinnati during the late years of the Marvin Lewis tenure. But Zach Taylor brings new ideas. The defense played much better than I anticipated. They did a good job holding Seattle down in the running game. I like Cincinnati, coming into this week, and I'm not too scared about the number yet because it's not up to 3. If it gets up to 3, I'll start thinking about it a little bit differently. But right now, basically, all they have to do is win the game for the most part with a number of 2. So still like Cincinnati a little bit in that one. How about this game? Game 279-280, Minnesota and Green Bay. Minnesota looks very good against the Falcons. Green Bay beats the Bears, has extra rest, but that's another one of those games where it's all in the eye of the beholder. Did Green Bay play well defensively, or was Mitch Trubisky just terrible in that game? A lot of people have strong opinions on the Trubisky side of that argument, and Green Bay is a 3-point favorite here this week, despite showing nothing on offense in week 1. So what do you make of this NFC North matchup?
Well, first off, I picked Green Bay. That was my top season over-under bet. I think Green Bay has a very good chance of getting to the Super Bowl. That defense is so much better than it was last year. But keep in mind, that game, Green Bay and Chicago, not only did, especially Green Bay didn't play, Aaron Rodgers didn't play in the preseason, and you're playing a game on a Thursday. And we've all seen these games on Thursdays or you just don't have enough time to put in offensive game plans. The defenses have the big advantage. And let's face it, they went against the Bears defense, which was number one in the NFL last year. Tremendous defense. Now, obviously, they had different defensive coordinator, but Green Bay didn't do anything offensively. You're correct there. They didn't do a thing. You're taking a look at Aaron Rodgers. He threw the ball 30 times, 60% completions, only 203 yards. Both teams really struggled offensively, but a lot of that had to do with, number one, it was the first week, and they didn't have time, and they didn't play in the preseason. And the other was, it was 3 days earlier than what the other teams got to play. Obviously it's the first week, and you're game planning all the way through the preseason. But still, when your starters aren't out there in game action, especially your quarterbacks, I would expect something better out of Green Bay. Minnesota, another one of these teams that I love the personnel on Minnesota. I just don't like the running of the football. But, hey, it worked last week. Kirk Cousins went 8 for 10. 10 passes in the NFL. How often do you ever see that? Just dominated on the ground and did whatever they wanted against Atlanta. This week, I don't think they'll be able to do that against this Green Bay defense. I really like the improvements in Green Bay. But like you, I was somewhat surprised it went to a full 3. I thought the line should have been 2.5. To me, there's some value here on Minnesota. But I think this is one of those games that you learn a lot about both of these teams going forward.
I like the point you bring up. I mean, Minnesota's going to try and run the football. Green Bay is going to throw the football. And if Green Bay gets the lead and Minnesota all of a sudden has to put it in the hands of Kirk Cousins, well, then what? And that's the problem with these running teams. Seattle, if they're able to play from in front, they'll be okay. And we'll talk about Seattle in the next segment with Wes Reynolds. Russell Wilson is at least a good safety net, a good fallback option. Is Kirk Cousins? I don't know. Most people would say no, despite the large Brinks truck that he has in his backyard full of cash. So that's the thing you got to look at here in the NFL is that some guys are progressing, some guys aren't from a play calling standpoint. You got to be real careful with those teams that really want to run the football. Baltimore wants to run the football. If they have success with it, that's awesome. Lamar Jackson looks better as a thrower than most of us thought. But still, you got to keep in mind, if Baltimore's not playing from in front, especially with big numbers, then things get a little bit more challenging for them. So, again, it's the NFL. That's the thing about the NFL. I think it's a more complex handicap. It's a more nuanced handicap of looking at, game flow, looking at what these teams do well. Whereas in college, it's just much easier to overwhelm an opponent.
It definitely is. The NFL, they're so much closer other than this year. Normally you have a 14 or 15-point differential. Obviously this year, as we see, the Patriots line continue to go up. It's going to be a different year this year in the NFL than normal. But, the Vikings, they do have the passing game. I'm a believer in Cousins. He doesn't have a good record against winning teams in the past, but he hasn't had this type of talent around him. He's got a great receiving core, and he's got a solid running back in Dalvin Cook. So Minnesota's one of those teams that if they are behind, I'm not too concerned about them having to pass the ball, and I have confidence in their passing game. So, I think Minnesota, when it comes to teams that have everything you're looking for, they're probably one of the top 3 teams in all of the NFL, and everything you're looking for from special teams to 2 ways to attack on offense, good defense. They're a really good football team. And, they had the down year last year, had some injuries last year. Minnesota, Chicago, and Green Bay are all excellent football teams, and all of them should be in to win close to 9 games, which doesn't say much about Detroit being in this division, but I actually think Detroit, other than the coach, is a pretty good football team itself.
One more thing I want to ask you about here real quickly. Just as I look up and down the board, I kind of had this thought. I know you're a big teaser player in the NFL. There are a lot of lines out there this week that set up pretty nicely for teasers.
Yeah, definitely. What I take a look at when I'm doing the teaser, obviously you want to pass through the key numbers of 3 and 7, and it works even better when you have low total games. So the first thing I look for is which are the lowest total games on the board. When I'm doing my teasers, I take all my handicapping out of it. It's strictly a number situation, or I'm looking to cover the lines between 3 and 7, and I'm trying to get it in a low-scoring game. I could have Team A on a teaser and actually have Team B as a game that I like. It's just a mathematical thing. It's called a Wong teaser. Stanford Wong came out with this years ago, and that's what I use. And it works out well. And even though if I'm picking a game, I think I have a 3 or 4 point edge in that game. If you're playing a 6 or 7 point teaser, points are valuable in the NFL, more valuable in the NFL than in college football. And so when you're playing your teasers, I look for low total gains, especially if you got teams that don't turn the ball over. That's really effective.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you got a 1.5 out there in the Giants. You got a handful of 2.5s. That San Francisco game is at 2. Again, you think that may be a little bit higher scoring affair, so maybe that's not, as good of a game to take a look at. But, again, trying to cross through those key numbers. If you get through 3 and 7, you're also getting numbers like 4 and 6. And, we saw how many missed extra points last week. 6 could be a pretty important number again this year in the NFL. So a lot of good teaser opportunities out there, to be sure. Professional handicapper Bryan Leonard, who's working and find over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over at the site right now, Bryan?
Working on my baseball for today, as I said. I found at least 2 plays that I'll be releasing today. Just a tremendous baseball season for us. We're getting to the point where over the last 2 years, we're just short of tripling our clients' bankrolls over the last 2 years, which is just tremendous. Those are for all of our baseball plays going back the last 2 years. I've been the number 1 baseball handicapper the last 3 years over at Wager Talk, and that's something that I'm pretty proud of because baseball, as you know, is a grind, and it's tough to win on a yearly basis. And you do get out streaks, you do lose once in a while, but if you can grind, and that's basically what baseball is, similar to the NBA, it's a grind sport. And if you don't mind grinding, there's plenty of money to be there. And I'll be putting my baseball plays up later today. Going in to do videos today. We've got a full slate of videos. I think we're doing 12 videos today. We've got a lot of guys in there for this week. Now that football's around, be analyzing some of the games and going back and forth on that, which is something I really enjoy. And I'll be doing it with Marco D'Angelo this week. And Marco and I tend to disagree on a lot of things, so it makes a good viewing situation. So, the videos will be up later. I'll be doing a live betting show from the FanDuel Sportsbook out in New Jersey this weekend. Also this week, tonight from 7 to 9 Pacific, I'll be doing live talking in-game betting and baseball. It's sportsgrid.com on the internet.
Well, of course, you can always follow Bryan on Twitter as well, at BLeonardSports. Check out his work over at wagertalk.com. Bryan, appreciate you hanging out for a few more minutes with me here on today's show. Thank you so much for that. We'll talk to you again next week.
Best of luck to everyone. Thank you.